but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Good evening, you lovely people. Welcome along to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on the radio. Tonight on the show, I'll be joined by politician, broadcaster and writer George Galloway to discuss, well, the state of everything. What on earth are we supposed to do to fix this world we're living in? I'll then be hopping across the pond, being the Atlantic, hopefully being joined by Jennifer Ewing from Republicans Overseas. And finally, we'll be talking to a representative of an animal sanctuary in Milnthorpe. They're asking for your old Christmas trees, believe it or not, as help for their residents. Stay with me to hear more about that. All that and lots of chat with our regular panellist and friend, Greg Swenson. But first, an update on the headlines with Sam Francis.
Neil, thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Sam Francis in the GB newsroom. Well, our top story at 6 is that flood-hit households affected by Storm Henk are being offered thousands of pounds in government support. People in eligible areas can apply for up to £500 to help with the immediate costs. There's also an offer of up to £5,000 in grants for some homes and businesses. There are still 210 flood warnings in place across England, with exceptionally high and, in some cases, record river levels. Great Western Railway is urging passengers to check for cancellations as several lines are closed due to flooding. A 16-year-old boy has been remanded in custody, charged with the murder of Harry Pittman, who was stabbed in London on New Year's Eve. The teenager died following what police say was an altercation, as crowds gathered on Primrose Hill to watch the fireworks. The suspect, who cannot be named, has also been charged with possessing an offensive weapon. Harry's sister has paid tribute to him, saying he had a heart of gold and that he wouldn't be involved in violence. Prince Andrew had daily massages during weeks that he spent at Jeffrey Epstein's home in Florida. That's according to the convicted paedophile's housekeeper. Newly released court documents in the US include her testimony from 2009, which says the prince and his then-wife Sarah, Duchess of York, were friends with Epstein and the now-convicted sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell. The unsealed files were part of a civil lawsuit against Maxwell, who's serving a 20-year prison sentence for recruiting underage girls for Epstein. Prince Andrew strongly denies any wrongdoing. Well, here in the UK, Rishi Sunak is facing a growing battle over his Rwanda plan. That's as his former immigration minister is threatening to vote it down unless changes are made. The bill has passed its second reading in the Commons, but Robert Jenrick abstained from that vote, claiming it wouldn't succeed in its current form. It follows reports that the Prime Minister also had doubts that the scheme would not be able to send migrants to Rwanda and would not stop channel crossings when he was Chancellor. Mr Sunak also proposed a smaller initial volume in flights, with just 500 flown in the first year of the scheme instead of the initially proposed 1,500. Well, meanwhile, the Chancellor says that he's not sure if the government can afford to offer voters any more tax cuts before the next election. A 2% reduction in national insurance comes into force today, which Jeremy Hunt claims will benefit 27 million people and save the average family with two earners nearly £1,000 this year. However, the government has frozen the income tax threshold, which has pushed many into higher brackets, offsetting the benefits of that national insurance cut. The Chancellor admits that further cuts are unlikely.
It was right to support families through COVID and through the cost of living crisis. And yes, taxes had to go up in that period, but we are a Conservative government that wants to bring down taxes because we recognise that families are finding life really tough. It's the start of a process. As Chancellor, if I can afford to go further, I will. I don't yet know if I can, but we want to do this because it helps families and it also helps to grow the economy.
Well, we've learned today that Russia has used North Korean ballistic missiles in Ukraine for the first time. That's according to an independent weapons expert. The United States has described it as a significant and concerning escalation in the cooperation between the two countries. Dutch researcher Joost Ollemans, who was among those to examine the debris, says Russia is violating international law.
Russia should be adhering to the sanctions on North Korea. Even more so when it's in the case of a highly significant type of weapon system like this short-range ballistic missile systems that we're now seeing. So that's really a very gross violation. It's just that there's no physical mechanism in place to prevent Russia from importing clandestinely, even very obviously clandestinely importing weapon systems if they choose to do so.
Almost 700 Afghans that were promised sanctuary here in the UK still haven't been relocated. Two-thirds of those who were eligible, who supported British efforts during the war, are yet to be resettled. That's more than 2 years after the Taliban's takeover. Some 1,500 are still stuck in third countries like Iran and Pakistan. The Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, says plans are in place to bring those refugees to the UK, but that it's difficult to predict just how quickly people in Afghanistan can be brought to safety. And Alaska Airlines has grounded all Boeing 737 MAX 9 aircraft. That's after a window and part of the fuselage blew out of a plane in mid-air. The plane was forced to land in emergency shortly after taking off from the US state of Oregon. Social media footage here shows the large hole in the plane where the emergency exit had previously been. 177 people were on board, but no one was luckily hurt. An investigation has since been launched. This is GB News across the UK. We're on TV, in your car, on digital radio, and of course on our website too, gbnews.com. Now though, it's back to Neil.
How many of yesterday's so-called conspiracy theories must be revealed as the truth before that worn-out label is finally abandoned? It's still out there, of course, casually tossed at anyone questioning lies, old lies and new lies. For as long as it lasts, I'll be proud and relieved to wear the badge of conspiracy theorist like a battle scar. It's been a couple of years at least for me now, but to be a conspiracy theorist is to have been right all along, despite the efforts of the paid-for liars. And it's also to be demonstrably well ahead of the gullible, still believing in smoke and mirrors. Conspiracy theorist was first used by the CIA to shut down those who doubted the official line about the murder of John F. Kennedy, that fishy old tale about a lone shooter and a magic bullet, and then that lone shooter being shot by another lone shooter before he could talk. That was in the 1960s, and from then, the label conspiracy theorist worked for decades as the means to make thinking people too scared to speak when they smelt a rat. Let 2024 be the year of clearing out the rubbish, the trash, the long overdue year when the past or sell-by-date labels, conspiracy theorist among them, are cast into the dustbin of history. Conspiracy theorist is hardly the only label used for ridiculing and so discouraging the truth. Over the last couple of years, those paid-for liars were churning them out like there was no tomorrow. Indeed, frightening people into thinking there would be no tomorrow unless they did as they were told was the whole point of the exercise. Granny killer, COVIDiot, denier. After conspiracy theorists, my own personal favourite is unvaxxed, still actually applied as though it were an insult. I sit here before you loud and proud as an unvaxxed conspiracy theorist, although I'll be honest and say, like many others, I worried about the consequences of outing myself as someone who had refused the jibby jab. Remember when to admit being unjabbed was not just to risk ridicule, but exile from society, inability to earn a living. What was I afraid of? For some of the time, I think I was actually afraid of being right, because what I came to think about those products as the months passed and the coercion to submit to them intensified kept me awake at night. But I know now that I've yet to meet anyone that regrets not letting that succession of pricks anywhere near them. To this day, I don't know anyone personally who died of COVID, but I do know or knew too many people who have since and suddenly and unexpectedly died of something else or been diagnosed with life-changing chronic illness. Hardly a month goes by without my hearing about another heart attack, another stroke, another 20-something dropping dead when no one had any reason to doubt they were in otherwise perfect health. Since January 2022, there have been more than 100,000 excess deaths in the UK, 30,000 more than the total of British civilians that died during the 6 years of World War II. What rational person resists asking questions about a statistic like that? More and more serious people, scientists and physicians among them, question whether COVID-19 even was a pandemic and suggest the deaths of the elderly during that time were at least in part on account of treatment meted out to them that was inappropriate, to say the least. All of this is in the public domain and I say demands serious contemplation. Pfizer is being sued by the state of Texas for allegedly mis-selling its vaccine product there, wildly overstating its efficacy. The AstraZeneca product has long since been withdrawn and is routinely labelled defective. And yet Bill Gates, who has described vaccines as his best ever investment, is out and about promoting the use of products built upon the mRNA platform in livestock and arable crops that might be the food of billions of people. Having conspiratorial tendencies may actually be the best protection out there. More and more of us say the elephant in the room when it comes to a grown-up conversation about all the unexpected dying is the suggestion of a temporal link between excess deaths and the rollout of the jabs. A factor among all the rest, and surely demanding of rational consideration, is that excess dying in both 2022 and 2023, when hardly anyone died of COVID, continued at over 9% after the rollout of the products marketed and frantically pushed by all and sundry as vaccines against the disease. Whatever those people are dying of, it isn't COVID. Pfizer have long since made clear they were never even asked to test if their product would stop transmission from person to person, and yet the apparent certainty of its stopping the spread to granny was preached as holy writ. It's no longer a sin to raise the subject, at least, anywhere but in the House of Commons and in parliaments all around the West, obviously. And everywhere there are louder and louder calls for the once and for all withdrawal from the market of the various injectables. But still, most medical professionals are yet to voice any doubts or concerns of their own. How long must we wait to hear, at the very least, evidence of their curiosity about what happened and is happening, all that inexplicable dying and accelerating illness, from tens of thousands of health professionals who actively promoted injections and who are in many cases still doing so? I make no apologies for still banging on about the jabs and the excess deaths, despite the ridicule it still draws in my direction, and I'll keep on banging on until every last drop of the truth is squeezed into the public domain. But my incredulity at the maintenance of conspiracy theorists as an insult goes much further than that. Right now, we're being treated to the Epstein client list, the list that was maintained and jealously guarded by the world's most famous dead paedophile. Most famous apart maybe from Jimmy Savile, honoured by royalty and the state both. Like many people, I don't for 1 minute accept that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. To me, no serious, honest person could accept as much at face value, swallowing the official line that outside his super-secure cell his guards were asleep and the security cameras turned off just at the time when he managed to break his own neck by hanging from a knotted sheet while in a seated position, a feat not replicated before or since in any so-called soft hanging. And yet, surprise, surprise, to question the state narrative on that shaggy dog tale and the corruption it revealed was also to be a conspiracy theorist, maybe even a domestic terrorist, to use another label currently being oversold by those with so much to lose. Now that conspiracy theory, which is to say talk of murder to silence a blackmailer financed by people richer and more powerful than him, is openly discussed. Who knows what more might be revealed from that murky store? It's still borderline treasonous to question the legitimacy of the 2020 US election, and yet we have long known that the truth of the Hunter Biden laptop, the honest and open revelation and discussion of which, at the time, might have affected that election in a way not beneficial to his dad, Joe, was determinedly suppressed by the media and the tech giants acting in concert. If that's not interfering with an election in favour of one side over another, I don't know what is. This time around, with the latest US election looming, the Democrat White House is striking from ballots the name of their biggest and most popular rival, and even doing the same to what it considers renegade Democrat candidates. The US government may yet put Donald J. Trump in jail to try and thwart his return to the White House. Once the land of the free, now more and more commentators are describing the US as behaving increasingly like a banana republic. And yet, with a straight face, Hillary Clinton and the rest of US political royalty loudly declare they are acting to defend democracy itself. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, and I say what's quacking in and around the White House now is a flock of shameless crooks, as corrupt and dangerous to life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness as it gets. Of course, conspiracy theorist, granny killer, COVIDiot, COVID denier, election denier, domestic terrorist and the rest are hardly the limit of the name-calling. In an attempt to shut down questions about the war in Ukraine, anyone asking was automatically to be labelled a Putin apologist. Now a generation of Ukrainians lies cold in the clay. To be sickened by the slaughter of tens of thousands of people in Gaza, children and babies among them, is to be labelled an anti-Semite, despite the fact Jewish people all over the world have joined the pleas for the killing to stop. It's not just bombs and bullets snuffing out lives in Gaza now, but man-made famine and its attendant pestilence. All four horsemen of the apocalypse are therefore abroad in that tortured scrap of land, and yet the majority of the nations of the West cheer them ever onwards. I've been called all the names. It's virtually a rite of passage on the road to accepting the obligation we have as members of the human race to voice doubt and ask questions about courses of action being adopted on our behalf by people we did, or in our case, didn't vote for. Here's the thing. Exactly how long is the lag between the bandying about of conspiracy theorist and the application of more accurate labelling instead, being perhaps person who knew and said so despite the certainty of abuse? How long is it to be in future? 2 years? 2 months? 2 days? Because it feels to me like the gap is closing faster and faster. So many state and corporate lies are exposed. Those of us paying attention already await the next lie. Cyber attack, war against Iran, whatever. We're stepping out into a new year. I'd like to hope it might be a year of change, for the better, away from state-sanctioned lies and towards truthful answers to questions from honest people. The US is not alone in contemplating an election this year. At least 40 countries around the world are doing likewise. We'll likely have one too. I said it was time to clear out the trash, and I mean it. Joining me tonight is my friend and one of my favourite regular panellists, the chairman of Republicans Overseas, Greg Swenson. Good evening, Greg.
Great to be here, Neil.
2024, here we are now. It sounds to me like a significant moment in time. 3 billion people plus scheduled to vote in elections around the world. How do you see it unfolding?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's half the world's population. I think, look, I'm an optimist. It can't be worse than 2023 in terms of the labels and all the things you mentioned in the monologue, which is troubling. And the optimist hopes that things will change and that people who speak the truth will not be treated as conspiracy theorists. The list is long. You hit a lot of them, but there are many others. And that's troubling. But I think that there's pushback, Neil. And you saw it this week with the ousting of one of the great liars in American education, which was the president of Harvard, Claudine Gay, sorry. So, I think the pushback has started, and I think you'll see more of it, and that's a good sign.
I agree, and I endeavour to be optimistic, but it also seems to me almost inevitably that so many people are so jaded and so exhausted by everything that's happened without respite over the last few years. How are people expected to regroup and do something positive?
That's a great question, and people just tune out. You know, they just say, I'm just going to go back to my job and my family and look after my children and go to church on Sunday and be civically involved and not obsessed with cable news. But I think that there's a lot to do, and I think there is some positive momentum. It's not just what happened at Harvard this week. I think, you know, the pushback is real. The parents, the so-called, the white supremacists that were going to school board meetings, or the domestic terrorists that were saying, we don't want this garbage, you know, taught to our children. That started a good couple of years ago, but it's working. And I think you're seeing it, and hopefully we'll see it in the elections, where people say, you know, let's let the people vote. And the best thing that we can do is vote the bums out, as you said, as long as we're permitted to by Big Brother.
But, I mean, when you say that, you know, elections are people's only practical hope in many respects. And yet, what do you make of the fact that in America, the lead Republican, the most popular politician in America, is being taken off the ballot? What's going on?
It's the ultimate election interference, right? And they started this with the indictments, and followed by the mugshot, and now by taking him off the ballot in Maine and Colorado. Interestingly, that's elevating President Trump. You know, he was basically in a dead heat with Ron DeSantis back in March of 23. CNN had him down 2 points to DeSantis, and they started indicting him, and all of a sudden he's picked up 15 points. So, you know, I think, and look, I would prefer Ron DeSantis to be the nominee, but I would prefer to do it by going to the ballot box. And that's the shame of this. And by the way, the Democrats are not just doing it to Trump. They're doing it in the Democratic Party. I think, as you mentioned in the monologue, the presidential candidate from Minnesota is a congressman whose surname is Phillips. I can't remember his first name. It's not that memorable. You know, he's a legitimate candidate, and he is running properly. And Marianne Williamson, you might think she's an oddball, but she ran in 2020 and was on ballots all over the country. And yet they kept both Phillips and Williamson off the ballots in Florida and North Carolina. That's the Democratic Party.
And the Democrats do say that they're doing this in the name of defending democracy.
Which is so ironic, when in fact they are using such undemocratic methods and really violating the Constitution on so many levels. I mean, just the list, again, is so long. You know, the smear campaign on Brett Kavanaugh, the student loan forgiveness, which was illegal and unconstitutional, opening the border and creating a humanitarian crisis, which is horrible, the way that women and children are treated at the border. That's all done on purpose by Biden, and it's against the law. It's against, the Congress voted that the border must be secured, and it's up to the executive branch to execute those laws, and they're failing to do that. So, you know, the list is long, and I think, again, the pushback is real. The news in the U.S., and I think Jennifer will tell you this later, the news in the U.S. is almost 100% about the border. And the elites in Washington just ignore it completely, like it's a non-issue. But for the people, it's a big issue.
For the people, it's quite a year ahead. First break coming up, after which I'll be joined by politician and broadcaster George Galloway. What does a politician of 50 years' experience see coming in the year ahead? Don't go anywhere.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
My next guest, well, he's no stranger to political controversy, that's for sure. Former MP George Galloway, hardly alone now in calling for voters to turn away from the Uniparty and vote for anyone other than Labour or the Tories. George joins me now, I hope, to talk about all of that and more. Good evening, George. Thanks for joining me.
Welcome, always.
George, this sounds like it could be a year like no other. Something unprecedented lies ahead. You know, we've got 40 elections around the world, half the world's population. What do you prognosticate and prophesy about what could and should lie ahead?
Well, 1848 was the year of revolutions. 2024 is the year of elections. But if the election is carefully rigged between Tweedledum and Tweedledee, or in the phrase that I gave birth to a decade or two ago, two cheeks of the same backside, of what use are elections? Your American guest was shilling for Ron DeSantis. What's the difference between Joe Biden and Ron DeSantis? Absolutely no difference at all. What's the difference between Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer? They're all Blairites now. Blair has become the hegemonic force in British and indeed international politics. Woke and liberal at home and imperialist and waging war abroad. That's the choice that we face. And so in a polity in which there is a uniparty, there is no real choice, what is the electorate supposed to do? Some of us in small parties will be trying to offer a choice. I hope to run for Mayor of London. As you know, that would certainly be a choice between me and little Sadiq Khan. But inevitably, there will be probably the great majority of constituencies in Britain where there is no real choice, in which case I say stay at home, or go and spoil your ballot paper. Declare that none of the above are good enough for you. And if the choice in America is, as I just indicated, if Donald Trump is shanghaied out of the process, made illegal, even put in jail. That's what American people should be doing also.
Are we holding our breath in a sense? You know, will what happens in America, whatever happens in America, dictate something profound about the future that lies ahead?
Well, I think we've become more or less one country, Neil. The great Oscar Wilde, one of our greatest, said we were two countries divided by a common language. Actually, I think we are increasingly one country. There's no doubt where the head of that new body is, but we are effectively enthralled to the United States. And all of their woke liberalism is now our woke liberalism. I saw it coming. I'm so old, I saw it crossing the Atlantic. The Californication of British politics came from California, came from the United States. And in terms of the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, the attitude towards China, all manner of international issues, our positions are identical. Now, I put it before, it's one thing to be a vassal to, you know, Jack Kennedy, or even Bill Clinton, let's be fair. But when you're a vassal to Joe Biden, inches from idiocy, a man who doesn't know where he is or what day of the week it is, when you're taking orders from him, my God, you've come down in the world.
George, bear with me. Greg, shilling for Ron DeSantis. Is there a choice? Is there a choice for Americans in America? Yes. Or is it, as George says, that it's just two cheeks of the same backside?
I'll agree with George, especially in the UK, because I often can't tell the difference between the parties. Boris and Rishi, when they were together, and now Rishi alone, basically governed like Tony Blair. I mean, you know, they might as well have been Labour. And they actually accomplished some things here in the UK that Biden could not get done in America because he didn't have the votes. Windfall taxes, fracking bans, you know, all kinds of things that only Biden could dream of. So there is some argument to the uni party here, and I do think in America too. If you look at some of the candidates, I would argue Nikki Haley she's a George Bush, John McCain, Mitt Romney Republican. Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy are not. They are actual conservatives. So I think in America, we still have a choice. We have real conservatives in the Republican Party. I'm not saying all of them are, and I thought 2008-12 were disappointing, but I think you have a choice now.
George, do you believe in your heart that meaningful change is still allowed? Will the powers that be, the incumbents, allow, if the people demand change, will that be made manifest?
Well, I did for many decades of my life, almost 3 of which I spent in Parliament. I must say I'm losing a very great deal of faith in that. I'm leaning towards the old slogan, if voting changed anything, they wouldn't allow you to do it. We used to believe in our country that we had freedom of speech until it was taken away from us. I have to, I think, lean towards the view that they'll only allow you to vote as long as the parameters involved in the choice, the dichotomy, is so narrow that it will make no meaningful difference. And I didn't use the 1848 year of revolutions analogy lightly. I believe that Britain, I can't speak for any other country, but Britain needs revolutionary change. It needs complete change. Virtually everything about our country now, apart from the people, are rotten. All the institutions we believed in, the police, the civil service, the BBC, the law, all of the parliament, the monarchy, all these things are hollowed out where they are not completely rotten. You know, I would once, with my first children, I would once have said, if you're in trouble, in any kind of trouble, ask a policeman. Well, I wouldn't do that now over the experience of previous years. I would have once said, and my father went to his grave believing, that if you heard something on the BBC, whether or not it was politically nuanced, it would be as close to the truth as you'll find in any news media in the world. That would be a laughable claim to make nowadays. I'm thinking that we need more than a choice between Sunak and Starmer if we're going to get out of this hole that our leaders have dug for us.
Absolutely, George. George, you've been saying the things that need to be said for as long as I can remember. Keep doing so. It's been a pleasure to have your cogent argument on the show tonight. Thanks very much. We'll speak again soon, I hope. Another break, after which it will be the turn of American political expert Jennifer Ewing to talk about the fact that, well, Trump is now officially off the list of candidates in Colorado and what that, amongst other things, may mean for American politics. Please don't go anywhere.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. It's all politics tonight, folks, and now a chance to look at what's happening on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean in the United States of America. Donald Trump has asked the US Supreme Court to reverse an unprecedented Colorado ruling that barred him from running for president in that state. Colorado's top court said last month Mr. Trump was not an eligible primary candidate because he had engaged in, quote, insurrection over the US Capitol riot. I'm joined now by Jennifer Ewing to talk about what this means for US politics. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. These manoeuvrings to strike a any politician from the ballot. Is US sliding towards the territory of Banana Republic?
Well, let's hope not. And I've been in California for the last 3 weeks visiting family over Christmas and everything. And one thing that I've been really pleased to hear when I talk to people, no matter what their political persuasion is, and California is famously, well, recently, a very blue state, though it used to be red, you know, home of Reagan and Nixon and Steve Bannon. But for now, it's blue. But people, even if they are not fans of Donald Trump and would like nothing more than to not see him be the president again, they want to take care of that at the ballot box. And even Governor Newsom, governor of California, who, you know, I'm not a huge fan of, he's come out and said, hey, let's beat this guy at the ballot box. So I'm very hopeful that most people, and not just people who are Republicans, and certainly not people who are just Trump fans, realize that the losers in this situation are, it's not Trump, it's the, well, it's the Colorado voters in this case, and it's the American people. We are the people who should decide, and it's very simple.
How did Americans get to this point? How can this have happened in the home of the free? The land of the free?
Sure. Well, we've always been a country that uses the law more, right? You get sued more over here, whether it's somebody spills a McDonald's cup of coffee on their hand and sues McDonald's, or somebody's dog bites somebody. So we've always been a little more litigious. I think what's happened, and Greg and I and a lot of the Republicans overseas UK have believed that what the Democrats have wanted all along is to run against Trump in the general election, right? Because otherwise they would not keep putting indictment after indictment, you know, 91 charges. I think Greg said earlier, before these indictments started, Trump and DeSantis were neck and neck, right? And with each indictment, he goes up. But I think that's backfired a bit on them. I think they are a little surprised at how many people continue to defend him. And even people who perhaps were not going to vote for him saw the slippery slope, if you said, you know, towards this Banana Republic, and are now kind of on board. So what's happened is they haven't been able to beat him with the charges and the indictments, so they're using these let's remove him from the ballot, which is, it's ridiculous. And quite a few states have already looked at this and overturned it. Michigan judge looked at it, and, you know, Michigan's a fairly blue state, and said, no, this is political. I'm not taking him off the ballot. Now, of course, it goes to the Supreme Court. And one of the craziest things I've heard is, the Supreme Court is right-leaning because, you know, that's how the numbers go. And perhaps Clarence Thomas or somebody should recuse themselves because his wife, you know, has been an activist on the Republican side her whole life. I mean, that's crazy, especially when you look at these Colorado judges and a lot of the judges in the different states. They are politically appointed. So it's just strange that people are picking up on this once we get to the Supreme Court.
Bear with me, Jennifer, while I just bring some of this to Greg. Jennifer raises the angle that America is a litigious society, litigious population. Should and can Americans have faith in the Supreme Court and that Trump is taking it to the highest court? Should they trust that justice will be done?
I think they can, because the justices are constitutionalists. You know, they don't rule because someone's right or left. They actually rule based on their understanding of the Constitution. So I think if it gets to that level, yes. And, you know, for those of us who maybe would prefer a different candidate, you know, perhaps we would want Trump to be off the ballot, right? If we were purely interested in our candidate. But that's the same that Jennifer mentioned Governor Newsom. We don't want that. Nobody wants that. I want to win at the ballot box. That's the way it should be. And I think you're seeing that pushback. That's why Trump's numbers have gone from 45 to 60. There's 15 points of resentment in there that the inner circle or the VIPs can decide who gets to run and who doesn't. And the Democrats did this in 2020. Bernie Sanders was clearly winning the nomination. Biden came in 4th in Iowa and 5th in New Hampshire. He was dead and buried. And they got together in the smoke-filled room and said, Biden's going to be the candidate. And that's how it worked out. So the Democrats have done this before. Sometimes I wish, in a funny way, that the Republicans could do it too, but that's not something I would endorse. Let the voters vote. Win the argument, win the persuasion.
Jennifer, there's 40 elections this year. Half the world's population are going to be invited to vote. When you look at that, if you had a crystal ball, how do you see that playing out? If I can invite you to make predictions about whether or not you think a difference will be made this year that will shape the longer future.
Sure, and you're right. 40, the 40, and I think it's also 42% of the world's GDP, are voting this year. So there's also a lot of money at stake. So we start in January this month in Taiwan. That's a big one, obviously. If the I was told if the pro China team wins, then actually that's better because it'll make China feel a little more safe. And so you start off there, you obviously go through the different ones. You go to ours, the United States, in November. And I think, if you look at Europe, you've obviously seen this sort of center-right nationalist populist movement. There is definitely one in the United States. And actually, I agreed a lot with what your previous guest, George Galloway, said with regards to a uniparty and everything. But where I disagree with him is saying everybody is the same. I do think in the U.S. we have a proper center-right grassroots movement. There is a uniparty as well, but the grassroots people are paying attention. It started with the Tea Party years ago and the Freedom Caucus, and they're strong. Look what happened last January with the Speaker of the House. So it's even within the Republican Party, there's people who are more freedom focused and more, as Greg said, uniparty focused, like a Nikki Haley.
Sure. Greg, George mentioned 1848, year of revolutions. When so much is at stake and in play this year, might we see something that in years to come we'll look back on and say, wow, the game changed in 2024 or not?
And hopefully it changed for the better. There's going to be some hiccups here. I mean, you can't have 49% of the world's population voting and not have some controversy. I think the U.S. election very well could be the most controversial if they keep doing these anti-democratic or extra constitutional things to favor their candidate of choice. But as Jennifer said, this movement in Europe was a really good sign. We're seeing the pushback that I mentioned earlier in the United States, the movement in the Netherlands, surely in Argentina. Around the world, there is a movement to take back away from the elites, away from these institutions that have lost their souls and don't represent the truth, whether it's in academia or media or especially in government. I think you're seeing the pushback. There'll be some winners, there'll be some losers, but I think the conservative, freedom-focused right will be winning more than losing.
Thank you for that, Greg. And Jennifer Ewing, thank you so much for being able to join us this evening. Thank you for your contribution. We'll speak again soon, I hope. Now we're on top of another break, and then it will be the Lakeland Wildlife Oasis that's launched an appeal looking for your Christmas trees instead of just throwing them away. Don't go anywhere.
(2024), a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Now, don't say that we're not capable in this show of a change of direction. Next up, a zoo in Milnthorpe is hoping that there can still be some use found for your unwanted Christmas tree. Lakeland Wildlife Oasis have actually launched an appeal asking for any potted trees to be donated to them instead of being thrown away. I think there may be a bit of a delay on getting hold of our contributor this evening, but Greg, it's got to be a good thing. Recycling at the grassroots level, inviting people rather than throwing their trees away.
It's great.
Give them to the animals.
Of course.
We're yet to hear what the animals are going to do with the Christmas trees, but...
Listen, conservatives are for conservation, right? It's in the word, right? And we like to conserve things. All good. You know, it's not the existential crisis of
I think we have him, Greg. Bear with me.
Yeah.
Joining me now, I hope, is the manager of the Living Collection, Dan Eccles, to tell us more. Good evening, Dan.
Hello.
Hi, Dan. What is this all about? I mean, seriously, what are the animals, God love them, going to do with old potted Christmas trees?
Well, we've all been there, haven't we? We've all wanted a potted Christmas tree for Christmas so that you can keep it in the garden and reuse it next year. I've done that the past 3 years, and every single time my tree has been way too scruffy to bring inside. So they usually get wasted or burned. What we will probably be doing with the trees is either brightening up the visitor areas, which is really important too. We've had a lot of ash dieback in the past few years, so just making the visitor areas a bit more filled out is really important. And that's a big thing because we've got a really big expansion coming up. It's the biggest expansion in the zoo for 25 years. So lots of exciting new exhibits, new species, including an extension to our fossa. So in terms of the trees that will go in with the animals, we have a number of cold-adapted animals that would naturally live alongside fir and spruce trees, which are your main Christmas trees. So things like our flagship species, which is the snow leopard, snowy owl, our Scottish wildcats, and our raccoon dog. They all come from boreal forests. So as well as making the enclosures look a bit prettier, it's also really nice and stimulating for them. And making those.
Does it when you've seen it in the past? Does it demonstrably make a difference to the animals? Because it's all about the animals. Does it that tweak to their environment, to their ecosystem? Do you see it having a beneficial effect?
Absolutely. You see lots of exploratory behaviours, exploring that new part of their environment. Some of the bigger animals, like the snow leopards, do like to wreck it as well. So I can't guarantee all the trees will survive. But that's just as stimulating for them as well.
I do love the idea, I have to say, of the thought of my potted Christmas tree becoming part of the landscape for a snow leopard. That's pretty exotic, a pretty exotic future for what might otherwise have been put in the skip.
Exactly, yeah, because otherwise they generally just get wasted, as put in the skip, as you say, or burnt or whatever. But this is a nice way of reusing those trees and putting them to use.
Pretty special, Greg, you know, the idea that we can, that something as humble really as a Christmas tree that we've lost the use for can go out and can actually make a difference to the life of animals in an enclosure.
No one will ever accuse me of being a tree hugger. I'm all for cutting the trees down as long as you put them back.
Yeah.
And so this is a great mission, and good for him.
Do you have a way in which people can get on board with this? Is there a website? Is there something that you can name check if people are actually in a position to jump aboard and give you the help you're looking for?
Yeah, totally. So if you go onto our website, you can find our email address. Shoot us a line if you've got something to give us. Christmas trees, we're not too picky. We'll take Christmas trees, potted native trees like horse chestnuts or hazel. Even houseplants could be put to use. Just the only thing we ask is that they're in good health, so don't give us dead or dying plants. But yeah, just find the email address on our website and let us know that you've got something for us.
Lovely stuff, Dan. As I say, I always like to try and end on a positive note, and the idea that there's even hope for this year's Christmas trees going into the future makes my heart swell a little bit with gladness. So thanks, Dan, for joining me this evening. That's just about all we've got time for this evening. Thanks to all of my brilliant guests, to George, to Jennifer, also, of course, to my brilliant panellist, Greg Swenson. The Saturday 5 is up next, but first, it's your latest weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. Looking at the next 24 hours or so, it's going to remain cold, frost and ice tonight, some fog patches again as well, and then fairly dry and bright through Sunday itself, and that's because high pressure is going to dominate. Into next week it starts to draw in colder air from the east, and we'll all notice that. But for this evening and overnight, generally still a west-east split across the country. Clear skies across Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of Wales and the southwest. Some frost, fog and ice forming here. Icy stretches elsewhere as well. Temperatures hovering close to freezing, falling well below freezing in the glens of Scotland down to around -7 or 8, possibly a little lower in 1 or 2 spots. But it means a sunny start here. Any fog patches will be slow to clear across the northwest of the UK, but they will eventually lift and break to allow sunny spells, and elsewhere generally dry with sunny spells. Scattered showers though on a brisk northeasterly breeze across southeast England, and some feeding in off the North Sea for northern England too. And temperatures on the cold side, generally 3 to 5 Celsius. Add on the strength of that wind, it will feel colder than the numbers suggest, near freezing. And another icy start Monday morning. Plenty of dry weather, a brisk easterly wind developing across England and Wales in particular. It could blow in a few wintry showers, but most places dry and bright. And it stays largely dry through Tuesday and into Wednesday as well, and staying on the cold side.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.